Welcome back to the Joe Miller Show, KOAN Hot Talk, 1080 AM, 95.1 FM. This show is made possible by the McPherson Tax Defense Group. 1-800-BEAT-IRS, BeatIRS.com. We have a very special guest online with us. His name is Jason Scott Jones. Jason and I have known each other for a while. He's been up to Alaska, spoken at Alaska Right to Life events, written a number of great columns. He's an editor at thestream.org. He also has quite a few other items on his resume, including that of a film producer, author, activist, human rights worker. He's appeared in defense of the most vulnerable members of the human family on ABC, Fox, CNN, hundreds of radio programs nationwide. And he's the founder of HERO, Human Rights Education and Relief Organization. It's a nonprofit that promotes human dignity regardless of age, ability, status, race, or geography, and is currently working to provide emergency aid to refugees affected by ISIS. We're going to talk today about an article that Jason wrote a little while ago entitled 2016 Needs a President Our Grandchildren Can Admire, and also apply it to the current events on the presidential scene, candidate scene. And then we're going to talk a little bit about, second segment, I think, the issue of the persecuted church and why that's not center in GOP debates. Jason Scott Jones, welcome to the Joe Miller Show.
Hey, Joe, it's great to catch up with you on your show.
So you're still up to good work. I can see that in what you write, obviously having a major influence. The presidential field, it's narrowing a bit. There's still quite a few candidates on the GOP side. People are trying to make heads or tails what they ought to do on this, and we criticize based upon if somebody says something stupid or makes a decision on a policy side that we think is not defensible conservatively, then we'll point that out. And, of course, we'll also point out the positives. Just most recently, we've put up several articles about Ben Carson. Ben Carson this weekend endorsed TPP, which is just yet another, I think, point against his candidacy. I just find it very difficult to support him. It's almost as if to where I'm at now that by process of elimination, but we were talking here at the break, it seems like that's kind of where you're at.
Yeah, no, it's, first of all, it is a bit confusing because compared to the past two cycles, these candidates are really head and shoulders above Mitt Romney and John McCain. But this is a great opportunity for those of us who are movement conservatives to really hold the line and demand a nominee who is truly a movement conservative. And they're all good, sincere people, common sense people who believe in religious freedom and respect. They're pro-life. But I want a fighter. I want someone who's a well-formed, thoughtful conservative, and I want to know that they're willing to fight for what they believe in.
Part of the problem, especially with people that get in as kind of novices, when I ran back in 2010, I had no idea what I was getting into. I mean, I had this kind of naive view that generally Republicans, the party itself stood for conservative values, basically the platform, the things that the Republican Party was for, and then discovered that really power and money was the primary driver for many of those in the leadership. And I'm afraid that unless we get somebody that really understands where we're at as a nation, that we're just going to see a co-opted person again. And in fact, I would even suggest, Jason, and you may disagree with me, that if we end up with somebody like another Romney or a McCain or a Jeb Bush, and I'll even step out, say a Carly Fiorina, the end result of that is going to be many of them are going to stay home.
Oh, no, that's of course. They keep telling us that we need a candidate that'll be able to move to the middle. But when we have a conservative run, a movement conservative like President Reagan, we win 49 out of 50 states. But when you sit there and try to play games with the electorate, in Senator Cruz's book, he shares like how you were shocked when you thought that the GOP wanted to live up to its platform and wanted to communicate truthfully to their supporters and their base. When during the debt ceiling vote, there was the move to use the rules of the Senate to allow Obama's wishes to happen as the GOP wanted, with them not having to support it. And Senator Cruz was shocked. He couldn't believe that the Senate leadership would conspire with the Democrats to fool Americans. And we need a leader who recognizes that the world is on fire, that the Middle East is crumbling, that ancient Christian communities are facing genocide, that our abortion culture is running amok, that religious freedom, after 800 years of of a tradition of religious freedom in the English-speaking world is in jeopardy. We need a candidate who understands that, who's not embarrassed of us, and is willing to communicate our positions broadly to America and then fight for them.
Yeah, one of the things that I've recognized recently, it seems that conservatives are losing the battle in the issue of the family. I mean, you had a Supreme Court decision, of course. You've got the media that is just headlong into this concept of basically imposing on Americans this non-traditional view of the family. I mean, for crying out loud, I watch hardly any TV. But one of the shows that I occasionally watch is The Walking Dead. And last night, what do they have? They have just front and center, there's no purpose in it, two women, French kissing in the middle of the movie. And most people, at least it seems, that are on the political stage at the national level are afraid to talk about that type of thing. They see it as a lost battle. They see it as, basically not making any political headway. But you look at the polling data, especially on this issue of the transgendered and men dressed as women using restrooms that your little girl may be in, and the vast majority of Americans are behind us on it. It seems to me that what the leader of the conservative movement needs to do, whoever becomes president, the presidential candidate for the GOP, is strike out hard on these issues, encourage the base to vote, and, in fact, the likelihood is much higher under those circumstances that they'll probably see victory. Is that your view?
Yeah, that's definitely my view. We run from our winning issues, but when you have money from the likes of the Koch brothers, who are pro-abortion, who are pro-same-sex marriage, and they're fueling the GOP, their hacks run around the country and tell candidates to run from these issues. We have these GOP hacks coming to Hawaii, my home state. They go to Louisiana, they go to Mississippi, and they tell folks to stay away from traditional marriage, to stay away from the life issues, when they're clearly winning issues. And in my own state, for example, 3 out of 4 voters in Hawaii voted against gay marriage. It is a union state. We have a lot of new immigrant groups, and they work for public sector and private sector unions. But they go to mass daily. They're daily mass attending Catholics. They're parts of, like Assemblies of God churches. And 3 out of 4 voted against gay marriage. We even had a Democrat who was a lesbian in Hawaii, a native Hawaiian, vote against gay marriage because she said it was offensive to her culture. And yet, we have these GOP hacks fly into my state, and they tell our candidates not to talk about marriage, not to talk about abortion, but to talk about economic issues. Well, when you're in a community where most people are in labor unions, our only chance of getting them to vote for us is to lead on social issues. So if you run from social issues, you have the situation we have like Hawaii, where they don't win a single election.
I couldn't have said it any better. I think you're spot on with that. When I went through the process both in 10 and 14, I met with some of those groups, and you're exactly right. The first words out of the mouth are social issues lose. Stay away from them, Joe. And, of course, I won't, because that's, this country right now rises or falls based upon the family, its structure, God, on all the traditional social concepts. And yet, like you said, you got folk that are funding the supposed conservative movement who are ordering people to stay away from it. And in fact, if they find candidates that are social conservatives, they'll support the establishment non-social conservative over a radical, free enterprise social conservative, because for some reason, when it boils down to it, even though they claim that they're free enterprise oriented, they're more, I think, anti-social conservative than they are free enterprise, believe it or not.
Oh no, they'll come against the social conservative if they win the primary. Well, you experienced this firsthand. They're going to come at you with everything they have. But here's the good news: we have a lot of friends, that vote Democrat. And so if we, as conservatives, get a hold of the narrative, when you hear these GOP hacks, they'll say lip service publicly. We want to go after the woman vote. We want to go after the youth vote. We want to go after the African American or Latino vote. But then, of course, they forbid talking about the issues that actually reach out into those communities. If you want to reach into the African American community, talk about traditional marriage. So when the Koch brother types, they don't want the African American vote. They should just put out a sign and say, we don't want the African American vote. We do not want the Latino vote, because we're going to tell our candidates not only do they not want you speaking on those issues, They will tell you to take those issues off your website. They'll tell don't put them on your palm cards. And now, are there some districts in America where it might be prudent for a conservative Republican not to lead on marriage if you're running in Mississippi? I'm sorry, in Boston, Massachusetts, and you're a pro-life Republican, maybe you shouldn't lead with abortion and marriage. But you're telling me in Louisiana, Mississippi, Hawaii, Alaska, and in Hawaii and Alaska, we share a lot of people. I don't know what it is, but so many of my neighbors are from Alaska, and I know that they have the same social conservative values that we do in Hawaii, and yet they preach the same gospel. Not the gospel. They preach their their culture of death anthem across the country because they are pro-abortion. They do not.
You're spot on. Lisa Murkowski just announced her re-election bid, and guess who's in the crowd cheering her on? Some of these supposed conservative groups that are getting funded by the big names that everybody on the left think are these right-wing conservatives. The reality is they're right in the camp with some of the far left on social issues. Jason Scott Jones, that's who we're with. We're going to hear more from him. The persecuted church, what's going on with the Republican debates, while they're staying away from that topic. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Joe Miller Show, KON Hot Talk 1080 AM, 95.1 FM. We have with us Jason Scott Jones, the film producer, author, activist, human rights worker, been all over the news, ABC, Fox, CNN, hundreds of radio programs, writes for thestream.org. We're going to get a story or two up from him tonight, along hopefully with the podcast. Of course, I've known Jason for some time, come up to Alaska, spoke for Alaska Right to Life. We're going to talk a little bit about why in the debates the media won't even ask about persecuted Christians. But first, I want to briefly continue the discussion we're having on how some of these so-called conservative groups across the United States really aren't acting in very conservative ways. Specifically, Jason, you brought up the Koch brothers, suggesting that in some regard they really aren't the friend of the conservative. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, well, there's certain major quote-unquote donors from the right, which they're not even conservatives. They are hostile to social conservative values, and those of us who are socially conservative. And people ask me in the movement, why do you bash the Koch brothers? I go, look, I am with them on most of the issues that they claim are most important to them, but they're always throwing obstacles in our pathway to success. And what I'm talking about specifically is protecting the preborn child from the violence of abortion. And that is the issue that animates me. I've been involved in politics since I was 17, and I am a thorough, well-formed conservative. I founded the Young Americans for Freedom at the University of Hawaii. I am a broad-based conservative, but, we are just rearranging the chairs on the deck of the Titanic if we don't save the family. And the most important issue is abortion in my mind, because the abortion issue is really a fight to save the founding principle of this republic, which is we are all endowed by God with inalienable rights, and that first right is the right to life. And our civilization was founded with the incarnation of Jesus Christ, and that changed how we see the human person. And when we talk about being conservative, we're trying to conserve two things. Primarily, first of all, a respect for the dignity of the person. And number two is acknowledging that there is a law above the laws of kings, a law above the laws of the state, of the government. And this past summer marked the 800th anniversary of the Magna Carta. The Magna Carta was the first time in the political history of mankind that there was a political document that said to the king, there's a law above you. And that's why, just as a bracketed subject, it is very important that there are consequences for Hillary Clinton. There's a law above kings, states, and even Hillary Clinton. And then, of course, you had the Glorious Revolution that reasserted the rights of the individual. And then, of course, what I think is the most important day for human rights in the history of the world is July 4th, 1776, the Declaration of Independence, laid out for all the world to see, a document that said that governments must acknowledge the incomparable dignity of the human person, and in fact, exist to protect the human person from violence, and abortion undermines all of that. So the Koch brothers, with all of their money and all of their activity, are really just rearranging the chairs on the deck of the Titanic. If we don't protect, again acknowledge the incomparable dignity of the human person and protect really the most vulnerable members of the human family, the child in the womb, from the violence of abortion.
Now, you wrote a story, The Question the Media Won't Ask, about persecuted Christians, even at GOP debates. Is there any type of connection between what you're talking about with respect to the desire of some of the funding sources not to have any connection to social issues, and the fact that this issue, probably the most pronounced persecution of Christians that we've seen in hundreds of years, is not front and center in the GOP debates?
It's been really shocking, and I think you're onto something there. People always tell me, Jason, pick an issue. Is it Christians in Iraq? Is it Afghanistan? Is it Sudan? Is it the new mountains? Is it abortion? I say, what really animates me is protecting the vulnerable from violence. And we've become, I think, if not us, the mainstream media, they're just decadent and vapid. And I just don't think that these people register. They're asking questions, and I don't blame the candidates, but the moderators are asking questions. What do you think about her faith? What is your position on legalizing marijuana? Let's talk about your fantasy football team. We have genocide, ethnic cleansing that has not been seen since the Holocaust. You'd have to go back to see Christians. You'd have to go all the way back to the Armenian genocide 100 years ago. We're actually seeing a repeat on the 100th anniversary of the Armenian genocide, which, by the way, wasn't just Armenians. It was Chaldeans, Assyrians, Syrians, and just a century later, to the year, we have the same people facing absolute ethnic cleansing, and there's not one question to these candidates. And I think the mainstream media doesn't want to embarrass the Obama administration by asking this question. We now have Putin, set to probably occupy Syria. What do you think Russia's response is going to be to this plane? This act, what appears now almost certain to have been terrorism. Russia is already flying, controlling the skies over Syria. So now the only hope for Christians in the Middle East is Russia? How did we get to such a point?
Right. Yeah, it's really kind of perverse how things have switched around. And it's more than that, Jason. It's also the issue that many of these groups that are out there persecuting Christians have been funded by the United States. In fact, much of what we've seen in the Middle East with the instability, the adverse impact to Christians, is a creation of the Obama administration. More than just the Russians coming in and riding in on the white horse, it's that we're largely responsible for the persecution that we see. I mean, look at the top countries that are persecuting Christians today and our connection to those countries. Many of them are considered allies of ours. Jason, I'd love to talk to you much more about this. Got to go, though. I appreciate your insights. Again, keep fighting for those that are defenseless. Keep on pricking the conscience of not just, obviously, the people of this country, but the leaders of this country. I appreciate your efforts in that regard.
Well, thank you so much. In the 50th states, the 49th states, the last two states, let's save this republic.
Absolutely. Jason Scott Jones, fighting for life, fighting for liberty. Stay with us. We'll be right back after these messages.